Rick, we finally found some time to get together and casually talk about what our work has been. And I know back in 2013, we started talking about let's create an institute and really work with therapists and training them to work with childhood developmental trauma. And so now it's 9 years. I think it's been 9 years now we're looking at. And I'm so excited because as we've trained many therapists, and we have graduates that are out there, and they're in their private practice healing other people, clients of theirs. One thing I was thinking we could talk about today, which is really important, is what is this practice that we're talking to people about? The practice of healing our core issues. And we call ourselves Healing Our Core Issues Institute, and what is it like once you do some of the trauma work that we offer and you go through our whole program? What does my life look like once I'm in the practice of becoming my healthiest, most functional self or wiser self? So I know in some of our trainings, this is the part that I talk about the most and really kind of came up with because I decided that in order to live out of our healthiest self, that's actually what I did in writing my book, which is now 3 years old. And that's part of my title, I called it, is Gifts from a Challenging Childhood, creating a practice for becoming your healthiest self. So what does that look like? So I thought when I made this, the 5 components of the functioning self, I thought maybe we could just discuss personally my experience of what those 5 components are, how I live in my life and practice that day by day. So are you up for that?
I think that that'll be a place for us today to be able to give to the folks who are watching this the hope that we have in this healing process that has unfolded over these last 9 years.
So maybe many people don't know, the people who've trained with us know that part of our model has incorporated many different methodologies of today. And the first one, which I think we both have studied with Peter Levine, is the importance of somatic work as regulation in the nervous system, because when there's high activation and any kind of trauma from childhood, some of that energy still stays in the body. So one of my first components, or our first components that we talk about in our trainings, is the importance of regulating the nervous system. And so, and not to get into too much like particulars of what that means, but whenever there is a trauma, our nervous system, the sympathetic charge happens and we get dysregulated. And when we get dysregulated, really what happens is the prefrontal cortex goes offline and we're in our limbic system and we're emotionally swimming around and really struggling. And so we call that high activation, and how do we regulate ourselves? So living out of the more functioning self in me is staying in touch with when I get dysregulated. In fact, I'm just thinking even right now, as I really tap into my nervous system, and I take a breath and I notice that my activation is there, is just staying in touch with my body moment by moment and being aware of when I get highly activated and knowing that it's my job in my practice every day to regulate my nervous system when I'm working with clients or I'm with my family at home. And so I was thinking of an example of, I'm chuckling just before I came here because we're filming here in Cincinnati, is that my husband and I had a big disagreement about who's taking me to the airport. And so...
Sounds like a familiar one for all of us.
I know. And so what happened is I said, okay, are you taking me at 7:45? And he's like, I'm not taking you to the airport. And we got into this whole thing. And I said, no, but you did say you were taking me. And he said, no, I never said that to you. And I found myself getting very dysregulated. I wanted to start... I had this kind of visual picture of me wanting to scream and yell and say, you said it to me, and turn into kind of regress there. And so I was quiet. I remember feeling the activation. It was like a whoosh that happened. And I thought, okay, I'm going to breathe. And I'm going to regulate myself and come back down and really think about, okay, what really did happen? And that's a perfect example of staying in touch with my regulation, my nervous system, the activation, and being responsible for bringing it into what we call more regulation. And sometimes I do it through resources, like putting both feet on the ground, and sometimes I do it through my breath, just breathing. And sometimes I do it for just taking a break, going to another room and finding myself to have to regulate. So I thought I'd take the risk and talk about something personal, and I thought I'd pass it to you for you in your practice somatically and how you regulate yourself.
One of the things that I was just thinking about was the fact that in doing this work now, because of becoming more attuned to my body, I was noticing it as we were sitting here right now. And one of the things I know about myself is that when I have some activation, that my feet get colder. And so as we're sitting here, I'm noticing the decrease in my temperature in my feet. And I was like curious about that. I was noticing that. I was also noticing that my hands here, just sitting, and this feels like a place of comfort to me. And I think that is also an example of the somatic presence of the sensations in our body, noticing my feet and my hands right here. You and I had shared a bit yesterday about the interaction that you had and talked about that and the settling. And I think that's one of the things that, as I live this my own life and work with people, is that these small things matter. This attunement right here, that sense of self, and that whether it be in activation, a charge like that, or in just being present, or as we face the day. Again, one of the things we were talking about.
Children.
And our children, high activation, as well as we practice what we believe with our boundaries. That's a true place of activation for all of us, and something you and I have talked about with our own children. But also I think that as I think about this, just how helpful it is, just that half a second pause, just to be present in yourself, which is a skill to develop.
Exactly.
And that's why we call it a practice. And so the somatic work has, I think, a huge factor.
Yes.
Yes, essential for us.
So basically, it's the first component, which I call the functioning self, or the functioning or the wiser self. And would it be all right if I go on to the second one? Yeah. So I was thinking the second one that I really identified is really from the work that I did once upon a time with Jon Kabat-Zinn. And Jon Kabat-Zinn, some people call him the father of mindfulness. But how he defined mindfulness, I mean, that's kind of a buzzword today, mindfulness. But how I use it and how we train therapists and my clients is mindfulness has to do with being able to step back and observe the self with curiosity. And Jon Kabat-Zinn actually says, I like his definition, paying attention in the present moment without judgment. Now, most people can pay attention to themselves, but they have a lot of judgment. So this is the step where you step back and you're curious rather than judgmental about observing the self. Because when you're doing any kind of healing work, it's essential because you're going to see parts of yourself that aren't all that attractive. So in order for you to be curious about how they were created, how they came into being, how they behave, how they respond, I mean, you can look at it and say, oh, I'm disgusting, or be judgmental, but what I talk about and what we talk about in our trainings is how important for people to really look at themselves with curiosity. And I think that's something that's really dropped into my life over the last few years, is just not going into contempt of myself, but going, wow, there's that place in me again that keeps popping up. And it's not that attractive, but what's going on that it's there? And okay, so how can I now shift, correct, and be in relationship with what that is? So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but I thought that might be something you want to say something about.
Well, one of the, as we developed the model and thought mindfulness was really important, I think it's really interesting because there are several models out there who now use mindfulness as a part of their practice. People who are watching this are familiar with that. IFS certainly use this, DBT, other models as well. And I have found it to be, using one of your words, essential as a skill to develop, especially with understanding your developmental trauma, when that you experience things in your life and that you're unaware of what's happening. And so this practice of mindfulness has been transformative for myself. And I can say that it's been a 9-year journey, and that I'm so much more aware of what's happening in the moment. And I have a harsh, critical voice. And so you just reminded me again of the spirit of John is that being present in the moment with no judgment and of self or of others. And I just think that brings you into, again, a practice of health for yourself. And as we like to say, we can't control others, we can only control ourselves. And so just being more, again, somatically aware, as we were talking about, and mindfulness is a part of my passion for our work and helping individuals to really to live the best life they can. And these are skills that no matter where you're coming from, that you can develop.
I think that this whole idea of mindfulness, what I called it in my book, was compassionate self-awareness. And I like that term much better in some ways than mindfulness. It's more unique, but it really kind of embodies this idea of when we talk next about the 6 practices of self-esteem. Self-esteem is really compassionate self-awareness and holding yourself that way. So I was just thinking along the lines of the example I was using with my husband. And I remember once I felt my nervous system get all charged up and I got dysregulated. The first thing I did is I really stepped back and I was like, where am I in myself? What's going on here? And that's the power of compassionate self-awareness. Like, oh, I know this place in me. I go here when I'm really angry and hurt. And okay, so what's happening? And regulating my nervous system, bringing myself down, and doing this in, like, I think that's the interesting thing about all this is that I have been a therapist and teaching and in practice for almost 27 years, but it was really only the last, I'd say 18 years that I've really been working on myself as a wounded healer, as we talk about. And as I've done that, I've really, my ability to catch things quicker that's the difference. When I first started working this practice, it would take me sometimes days to figure out what was going on. I mean, it's like, where am I in myself? But now I feel like, that's where I am right now. And what do I need to do to really bring myself into my healthiest, most wiser self, more functional self? So I'm thinking of the third components of the functioning self, or as we're calling it, the wiser self. Actually, John Kabat-Zinn uses that a lot. And I'm thinking of the 6 core practices, which we will be talking about in another video that we're going to do. And the 6 core practices are the self-esteem, holding the self with warm regard, boundaries, really protecting myself through functional boundaries. The third one is knowing the self, which has to do with my reality and figuring out what's going on with me. The fourth one has to do with self-care, needs and wants. The fifth one, which I really like how you've changed it to being spontaneous and joyful. I love that. And really the practice of being spontaneous and being in my true essence. And the sixth one, of course, is being attached and connected to people. So we are going to go into that in more depth in our other video that we're going to do. And a question I have is, Any thoughts you want to say about those 6 core practices and how you use them in your everyday life?
I think one of the biggest ones that, as we're thinking about this, because this is the third component of the healthiest adult self, our wise self, being our most functional, is just how incredible, and I always say this, that each one is independent, but it is the integration of all 6 that is our highest self. Or as we think about
I like
Maslow,
that.
and I think about that like with his hierarchy, and I'll do that sometimes where it's like in teaching it, is that self-actualization and just really in our best self. And that when we are practicing these 6 things, which we,
Right.
are able to, each one of us, experience, that I am esteeming myself from within. I'm able to use my boundaries. You talked about losing your boundary the other night. It
Who,
happens.
me?
What? It happens to all of us. And but being able to recover, that's what you were talking about, is like, oh, wait a minute, I've lost my boundary, and grounding yourself, which is the somatic, the mindfulness, the work of boundaries, and that you're able to really know what's happening.
Yes.
Is this my adult self? Probably not.
Yeah.
This is probably your teenage part. I know her well and so appreciate her as you know mine. And just that was an act of self-care. When you took that time, and however that unfolded for you, and backing out of that a bit, and when I think about core issue 5, that's that balance. You could have let it rip, another Jan quote, and you didn't. And then it's all about this interconnected sense
You
of
know what I
self.
just realized it's about? It's about making a choice to be functional every moment.
Moment by moment.
And understanding that we're human and we fall off of that, but bringing ourselves back to my choice to want to be functional and related to people.
I love that, because, and people that know me, and I'll say that a lot as I'm teaching this, but also living it in my own life. Core issue 3, your humanity. Oh, there I am. Self-compassion, where I'm able to pause, and that is the practice of what we think of as core issue.
Yep.
As being practiced in our lives, which is the emphasis of your third component that you developed in your writings.
Right, right. And really being in the practice of the 6 core areas is really about being relational. I mean, it's I remember Pia Mellody said, the minimum of loving anyone is respect. And living the practice is really being connected and attached to people and being respectful. So those are the first 3 components. Now let's talk about the 4th component of the functioning self,
Okay.
which of course is what I call reparenting our historical selves. I've written about that in my book, and I thought that sometimes people have a difficult time kind of understanding that, but for most people, that as they have been in the practices of observing themselves, they start realizing that when they get triggered, okay, activation, sympathetic charge happens, and all of a sudden their nervous system, they go off and they kind of start becoming maybe their teenage self, or a really young, really hurt self, or a lonely self. And so when I talk about that in my book, I always talk about what these parts are, that there was a purpose for the parts. They help them adapt and to survive sometimes some hard places in our childhood. And so these places in us don't go away. I think most people think, oh, no, that's just me. Well, it's not. It is a part of you. And one of the things I thought when it comes to parts is that we have to be familiar with them and understand when they come in, and then how do we actually go in and reparent. Now, in our training, we go through extensive ways in which you teach your client how to reparent those parts. But as you practice this practice, and we've been in it for years now, it's kind of on the fly that we do it. It's like, so I can be from Boston, Boston driver, and they're notoriously known for their bad driving. And, you know, in the moment, you can be driving along, listening to some great music, and someone doesn't put their blink on and slams on, and you're like, yeah, you know, I find myself saying, what's that guy doing? What an asshole. And, you know, then I go, wow, where did that come from? And excuse me for saying that, but that's really what happens to me. And I go, okay, Jan, is this guy probably lost? I look at his plates and it's from Rhode Island or something. Well, he's probably lost. He doesn't know where he's going. And here you are, and you're being a real jerk with him. And you're getting really activated, and you're turning into your teenage self. And my teenager was that way. She was pretty outrageous, and maybe it's hard to believe. I don't think it's hard for you to believe.
I know you well. I can see that
she was
teen.
very outrageous, a little boundaryless, maybe a lot. And so I have to really kind of keep control of her. And so when she shows up, I mean, she has some great qualities, but sometimes she can be very disrespectful. So what I'll do is I'll say, okay, Jan, do you ever get lost? Yes. Do you ever are driving slow and forget to put your blinker on? Yes. Yeah. Okay, so bring yourself down, get off your high horse, and have some compassion for this guy. So I call that reparenting on the fly. Yeah. So I don't know if you want to say anything about it, but I think this is a really important place in our practice of being functional, is really keeping an eye on these parts that act up at times.
Yes. Well, one of the ones that's been present for me that I've been thinking about this week, and as we've been talking about this, is that I call this my adapted elementary age self, so 7 or 8 years old. And not going into the detail of that, but very much in this is how this can be, like you were talking about your teenager being outrageous, and this is a specific memory where I was, and it's benign, and that's why I share this one as I think about it, is that my dad and my younger sister and I were playing hide and go seek, and so that's how I want people to be able to think about when you talk about our parts, knowing our parts, and what that looks like in our current life and how to reparent that part of us. And I was counting, and my sister was hiding, and my dad was helping her out, and I did it wrong. I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and I ran in the other room. And they were still in this process of hiding. And my dad, who was a good man, but he looked at me, and this moment and the look of disappointment on his face, and I dropped, and I was like, I'll do it again. And he's like, no, never mind. And he was just being a parent. Yeah. And I've done work around this as I share this story, but it's that knowing the self. And in doing this work, it hit me that was the formation. You know, we talk about those specific, explicit memories of ours, where I say was the beginning of my codependence. Was that doing this work, I realized when I talked to that younger part of me that I am responsible for you, and I don't want to disappoint you. I was responsible for this game being successful. Now I'm 8 years old. I'm being a kid, and so I can have, again, compassion for myself now. But that's a memory that I have felt guilt and shame over.
So
my
how
whole
does
life.
that show up in your life today?
Yeah.
Because
all
the key
time.
is it's historical, but it shows up today in our lives, and that's where we get to see it, right?
And that's where that I just told that little backstory because I would love for you to tell a teenage part of you, because you have some great stories from those years in Chicago.
We could never put those on film.
Oh. That's why I say I use the example here of, as we do this work, because sometimes as we're working with people or encouraging the people that train with us, it's like these small things can have these huge impacts. And so it shows up frequently. Now, I've been in recovery for this for 15 years minimum as I've done this work. But is that when I feel like I'm responsible for any other person's well-being. I'm in that.
Oh,
I'm in
that's
my
hard.
adapted self.
Yep.
And to up that ante is, and if you're disappointed with me, then
It's even worse.
it's even worse.
Yes.
That's exactly it. And so
So you're catching it more now.
just as you were describing that with your teenage part, that's why I say this is my adapted younger part, is one of my parts. There are several. But this one is where that then I say, okay, hold on, Rick. And just like you did, I have compassion for myself. There he is. And I can see that 8-year-old. I can see that room. And I can say, I've got this. And so I see him. And I'm aware of him. And I move on into my functional self. It is not my job.
Right, to take care.
To take care of
That's
other
right.
people.
That's
to be responsible for others. Again, well-being, happiness, whatever that might be. And to be human is for people to be disappointed because I'm going to make mistakes.
Right.
So I actually practice this a lot. And as a therapist, that's one of my jokes. It's a real setup. Responsible for your clients. And of course, as they find their way,
Yep.
they're going to have their moments
Right.
where if you were a better therapist, now they won't even say it.
Right.
I'll just take it on.
Right.
So it's a daily journey for me. But 15 years in,
Yeah.
and I can say that it's one of those that I just wanted to share today
Yeah.
as we're talking about this,
Well, it's
practicing this.
It's parenting on the fly.
Parenting
It's
on the
not
fly.
like, I mean, when we teach our therapists and they do it with their clients, you know, it's kind of a role play that you do, visualizations, a mind's eye. It takes, you know, a good 30 minutes. But this is really something you do and you're catching it much faster and
Yeah.
you move on. And that comes in practice for sure. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And so the last component, so we've been going through the components, the fifth component is being connected to a higher power or higher purpose. And, you know, from all my experience of being a therapist and working with people who've had addictions and they're in 12-step programs, you know, they talk about their higher power that they're connected to and being connected to something that's infinite compared to us being finite. And I just wanted to ask you personally, how do you practice that in your life?
Well, I think that it's certainly a topic that I've thought a lot about and I have a background in, and that I think in the spirit of spirituality it is a power greater than myself. I do actually practice the principles of 12 steps, particularly step 1, 2, and 3, when all of us can benefit from this, that I'm powerless. I was talking about that earlier, over others, situations, and things, and that I understand that there is a power greater than myself, and I've come to believe that that brings comfort and a resource. I have a spiritual tradition out of Judeo-Christianity, and very much value that and those principles, but also have had the privilege of working with the Orthodox Jewish community, the deep faith of individuals and others, such as Muslims and Buddhists and Hindus. And so appreciating that there is a source out there that gives us something beyond ourselves. I do believe that that's important. And I know you and I talked about this as you were writing the book, and just the idea of how to use a language that would be universal.
Right. Yeah, and I think for me, when I think of spiritual practice, I wrote this in my last chapter of the book, is really about this whole idea of, like you said, we're powerless or detaching from outcome, and really trusting kind of that there's a higher power, that there's something beyond me, and I get to just do my best at being who it is that I was meant to be. And so it is different. You know, there's many different ways, but the fifth component was definitely anyone in their practice for spirituality and being connected. And that is also part of being the wiser or the functional self.
And one other thing I would like to add to that as people are listening to this and they each have their spiritual tradition is that this is a highly charged topic.
Yes, it is.
As people listen to this wherever they're at, and that one of the things that I truly believe and teach within spirituality is that of making meaning. And I do draw from
I like that.
the work of Viktor Frankl and his book Man's Search for Meaning. Erwin Yalom talks about this. It's this idea of making meaning out of what's happened, and I think that's a part of our spiritual practice. Is no matter what's happened to us, what we can control is what I choose to do with it. That
Right.
I make meaning out of this situation. That there's something greater than what is happening.
Right. Higher purpose.
A higher purpose.
I love that.
Than this, and that I think that's a part of the emphasis. And again, because so many different people are sitting with us right now and listening to this, that I just want to encourage people in their own paths and in their belief system.
Exactly.
I came from a fairly closed-minded system, and have so much gratitude for the expansion of that in my own life,
Right.
and in encouraging people no matter what their background is.
Great. Yeah. So, well, thank you. And so we've kind of covered the 5 components of the functioning or the wiser self. And I can maybe recap them, see if I have how my memory's doing.
That would be great.
Well, the first one is regulated in the nervous system. So staying and the second one is being mindful. So mindfulness and being regulated in the nervous system kind of go hand in hand. Because if I'm in touch with the sensation in my body, and I'm breathing, and I am observing, okay, I'm regulated. I am present in this moment. So it's present in the moment. It's being mindful, and then it's embracing or being in the practice of the healing our core issues, the practice of the core issues. There's 6 of them, and we went through, and I said we'll be doing more of this in depth in our next video. But it being in the practice of self-esteem, esteeming myself, using boundaries, knowing myself, taking care of myself and my needs, being spontaneous and balanced in life, and being attached and connected to people. And then the 4th component is what we spend a little time on, which is about reparenting these wonderful parts of us that have been a part of our lives, and really being, like I said, parenting them rather than letting them run, the show. And the 5th one, which is being in a practice, being connected to a higher power or a spiritual practice, and being believing that there is some higher purpose and meaning in life. So thank you so much for being here and doing this. It's great. And I look forward to doing many more of these, and the work that we've done through these last, what is it now, 9, 7, 8, 9 years we've been in practice.
This month, September, was
yes.
the launch of the Healing Our Core Issues Institute in 2013.
Yep. So thanks, Rick, for coming today and rearranging all of this as we did to make it happen.
All right. Well, thank you, Jan. That was so helpful. And I know that people, as they are reminded of this or learn new things, are going to receive a gift out of it.
And thank you for being my business partner.
Oh, it's been a great privilege and honor.
Thanks.